my chocolate sponge. Now we're gonna wet this with brandy, but I gotta make chocolate mousse first. We're gonna take our yolks with just a little bit of sugar. I got 15 eggs here and about a quarter cup of sugar. If you use too much sugar, this will not whip up nice and foamy. And like the hollandaise, we get these started before we go to the heat. We start getting air into them before we go over to the heat. Just like you would a hollandaise. Melted chocolate and melted butter. We'll give you guys a recipe for this, but chocolate mousse is, for me, is 4 components. It's butter and chocolate, whipped egg yolk, sabayon, it's whipped meringue, and it's whipped cream. And they're all folded in one at a time. This is our yolks. We got boiling water. Remember we talked about whipping like this, not using your whole arm. That way you don't get tired. It's really in the wrist. Instead of using your whole arm to do this, and you get tired quick. And, you know, like the hollandaise, if it starts to get away from you, then pull it off the heat. So this sabayon you can make, instead of with water, you can use Marsala wine, a sweet wine, Madeira, sherry, white wine. The sabayons are usually with a little sugar, Marsala. It's cooked to a nice thick 5-second ribbon, and then you pour it over fresh berries like raspberries or strawberries, and then you glaze it under the broiler, and they're served immediately. And like the hollandaise, we're going to a 5-second ribbon, which means when we pull the whip through, we'll have a 5-second track. The thing that takes the longest to make chocolate mousse is to melt the chocolate and make the sabayon. And you make sure you pre-whip this before you come to the heat, otherwise you'll run the risk of getting scrambled eggs. Color's gotten light. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're almost there. There's our 5-second ribbon. I've got 2.5 pounds of melted chocolate, 16 ounces of melted butter, 15 egg yolks that have been whipped into a nice foamy sabayon. Get this folded in. This will add some air to our melted chocolate. Now, when you melt the chocolate for the chocolate mousse, make sure you do that way ahead of time and let the chocolate cool off. If you're dealing with warm chocolate, it'll knock the air out of your meringue and your sabayon and your whipped cream. So while this is sitting, we don't want to mix it too much because we still got to mix 2 other things in. You got our 15 whites here, and we're going to do a French meringue, which is, there's 3 different types of meringue. We got French, Italian, and Swiss. The French meringue is probably the lightest of the 3, the easiest to make, but not the most stable. The Swiss meringue is you take the whites and the sugar and you put them over a double boiler and you melt them. Takes less than 3 or 4 minutes, trust me. And you rub the whites in between your fingers, and if you don't feel any granules, you know it's melted. For the Italian meringue, you whip the egg whites until they get to a soft peak, and then you boil sugar to 238, 240 degrees, a soft crack, and you'll pour that in slowly into your egg whites. That's the Italian meringue. That's the most stable. My buttercream for cakes is unsalted butter added to that Swiss meringue. So this is starting to foam up. I've only got a quarter cup of sugar here with 15 egg whites, and we drizzle the sugar in so it'll dissolve as it's whipping. Nothing else in here, no cream of tartar, no lemon, no acid. And we're gonna beat this to a stiff peak. All right, you can see we're starting to get somewhere here. Like I said, this is the easiest meringue to make. This is usually the meringue that you make for folding into batters or cake batters. You use this meringue. The other meringues are used for more intense cooking items, such as buttercreams, baked meringue desserts like pavlova. That's what we're looking for. We always do the egg whites before we do the whipping cream because there's fat in that heavy cream, and that's not going to help our egg whites whip up nice and light. Any fat in those egg whites, and they will not whip up. So we always do the egg whites first. Now, before I fold that in, I like to get my whipped cream going. And this is just straight whipped cream. There's no vanilla, no sugar in here. And you could flavor it however you want. You know, you can put raspberry into this chocolate mousse, mint, the flavor possibility, orange, almond, anything that goes with chocolate, you can use that in your flavorings. We're going to go with flavoring our cake with some Kahlua, some coffee liqueur. Basically, the liqueur brings moisture and flavor. Now this is the top of the cake, which I'm going to flip and make the middle layer because of we're missing these corners. So I'll show you how that works when we get to that point. All right, so now we've got our chocolate and egg yolk sabayon. Now we're going to start folding in our whites. And we drag across the bottom, pull it over the top. And you don't want to be banging your spatula against the bowl. We're suspending this chocolate in air by having whipped egg yolks, whipped egg whites, whipped heavy cream. And again, we don't go all the way with this because we're going to be mixing whipped cream in there. We don't want to overmix this and break it all down. So we leave it there. Stiff peaks as well on the whipped cream. I'm using a 40% heavy cream. Ultra pasteurized helps. Very cold helps. If your whipping cream is warm, it's going to take longer. You know, when I find myself in the summer making whipped cream for my cream puffs, I'll throw an ice cube in my whipped cream as it's whipping, and that cold helps that heavy cream whip up stiff. Okay, so whipped cream all goes in all at once. Remember, we do the egg whites first, so then we don't have to wash out the bowl. And then, you know, I do the figure eight. And because that whipped cream is cold, it's going to help thicken this up too. And you'll see it. It'll start to come together nice and firm. Now, when I'm doing chocolate mousse for a glass, I don't like to mix it all the way. I like to have a little bit of streakage in there. Again, remember, don't do that. You don't want to knock the air out of your bowl. Okay, so this cake has already got Kahlua on it. We're going to get this chocolate mousse on here. On this first layer, because our top has got the curved sides, a little bit heavier on the corners and a little bit lighter in the middle. So something like that. And we got Kahlua on that top side of the cake, which is going to go top side down. And you know, you can see that this chocolate mousse is really easy to work with, but when this gets cold, it's going to set up nice and firm. Then we take the top, we make sure we push down in the middle so we get a nice flat cake. We run our spatula along the side, and we'll get all that chocolate mousse in there. Like I said, push in the middle so you can get all that coverage towards the sides. And like I said, if you have spots that need to get filled, you just scrape it in there. You can use a cake spatula. I'm obviously using a rubber spatula. So now we have that middle piece of cake that we cut. It'll give us a nice flat top. And we got the top of the cake. Now on the second layer, we're going to try to all make it kind of even because we don't have an uneven piece that we're putting on top. Now, if you wanted to make individual chocolate mousse in glasses with a piece of cake in it, you could do that. You could use ladyfingers, you can use vanilla wafers, whatever you'd like. So now we put our cake on top. And we make sure all our chocolate is smoothed out on the edges. And then we're going to put these in the refrigerator covered so they can set up. And then tomorrow we'll frost them with Ganache. Now overnight, this mousse is set up nice and firm. Make sure when you do refrigerate this at night that you seal it really well with saran wrap so it doesn't pick up any odors. Last night as well, I made my frosting, which is simply a ganache. I took heavy cream, brought it to a boil, and then added my Belgium dark chocolate to it. Turned the heat off and mixed it until it was melted. I let it sit over on my counter overnight, and I mean, that's chocolate ganache. It's gorgeous. So what we want to do is we want to trim the cake, get nice straight edges, and you don't throw this cake out. You save it. You don't have to worry about wiping the knife off because this is all going to get frosted. And basically we're just straightening out the edges. That's why you don't have to spend a lot of time buttercreaming the sides and making sure it's perfect, because it's going to get frosted and squared off anyways. Now, obviously you're not going to throw those scraps away, but if you want, you can cube them up, put them in a wine glass, and top them with cream and make yourself a little chocolate cake parfait. So that's what I do here. And I just turn around and sell them. I just make a nice straight cut. All we're doing is just straightening out the edges. You can cube those up, put them in a glass, or you can put them in a bowl and layer it with whipped cream or chocolate pudding or pastry cream or bananas. The list is endless. When I do these cakes here, I do them in a log. So I'm going to cut mine in half, push it over just a touch. Now, whenever I frost cakes, I always start with the sides, and you get enough frosting that's manageable. And you start to spread on the top half of the cake, and then you can push it down. And see, that was just really quickly and smooth. You start here, then you push it down. And, don't spend a lot of time fussing around with it. Because remember, you're going to be slicing this. You may be decorating the sides with crushed cake or toasted nuts or whatever type of garnish, sprinkles, jimmies. Okay, and once you get all the sides, then you do the top. And you put enough on to get the top, and you do the swirl. And you get the edges again, and then you pull the edges over. And you give it that last swirl. Then I transfer it to my other sheet pan, and what we'll do is we'll slice it. But now that I've got one of these cakes off this pan, I can kind of show you, I start the frosting from the top and then push it down, okay, because we don't want to waste the frosting. We start at the top and then we push it down to the bottom of the cake. And usually at the bottom of the cake, you'll lay berries or fruit or garnishes of some sort, or even maybe pipe on some of this frosting. Now, this is the quickest and easiest frosting that I know. You heat up heavy cream, you add chocolate, and it's done. All you got to do is let it set. If you need it for the same day, then you obviously would put it in a shallow pan in the refrigerator for an hour or so to get it to cool off quickly. Start in the middle, and then we pull the corners around. Then when we do the top, we put the frosting we think we're going to need, and we bring those sides up again, and we pull this over. We use the tip of our knife to garnish that. Now, when we use this cake, we garnish it with a berry. We use a sprig of mint. We use a little rosette of whipped cream. This frosting serves two purposes, obviously, for flavor. But it seals our cake. It keeps it nice and moist. Now, I did half a gallon of heavy cream with 4.5 pounds of chocolate, and it gives me enough for these 4 cakes. So if you were doing one cake, you'd need 2 cups of cream and 1.25 pounds of chocolate. You can bring that 2 cups of heavy cream to a simmer, and as soon as it does, you turn it off. You add the chocolate while the flame is off, and you stir until it's completely smooth, and then you would pour it into a container for the next day. I always make my frosting a day ahead of time because I like this texture. It's like buttercream. It's really a quick and easy, and it's a high quality icing. And it's not inexpensive, but it's chocolate and cream. I mean, how can you beat that?